In this video, I'm going to show you how you can configure authentication in OSPF v2. For OSPF v3, there are very subtle changes, which I'm going to speak about when I'm explaining OSPF v3. But for now, let's say that I'm just going to configure authentication between these two routers, router 1 and router 2. And as you can see, there is just one interface between these two, Ethernet 1, and I'm going to configure authentication on this. Now, in OSPF, there are multiple ways to configure authentication, which I'm going to write it right here. So the first one is going to be plain text authentication, which means that you can configure to use a simple password in plain text, which can be, of course, can be visible if there's a sniffer program on the link. The second type is going to be MD5. MD5 authentication uses the hash algorithm of MD5 to create the authentication, which is much more safer, of course, much safer. And the last type is going to be null. Null means that there should be no password, which means that normally we are using null authentication as a matter of fact. Also, these are the types of authentication. We have a scope of authentication as well. So the first scope is going to be interface scope, and this means that I'm going to configure authentication on the interface level, and only that interface which has authentication configured on that is going to apply it. Or I can just configure it on area, which means that I'm having all the routers enabled as authenticated as a matter of fact for OSPF. Now, which one is better? Preferably you should go with interface authentication, because you do not really need to use authentication unless you are a little suspicious about whether your routers are exposed to some malicious attacks or something like that. Even if you go with MD5 authentication, that is not the best type of authentication to use. It is safe, but it is not super safe. So I would say that authentication is not going to be a feature that you really enable on your devices. Only in some cases when you have really good reason for that. So let's go for the authentication. The first thing that I'm going to do is to configure it under Ethernet interfaces here. On router 1, I'm going to say show run interface ETH1, and for now you can see that ETH1 does not have any authentication configuration. So I'm going to say configure terminal interface ETH1, and I'm going to say IP ospf, and after that the question mark is going to show you two things which are important. One, the authentication, which means that I'm enabling authentication, and the other thing is message digest key and authentication key. So in case I go with text, plain text authentication, so I need to go with authentication key. If I go with MD5 type of authentication, I should go with message digest key. So let's do this. Let's do IP ospf authentication. So if I hit this, this means that plain text authentication is going to be supported. So OcNOS supports plain text authentication. But like I said, this is not a good thing as a matter of fact, so you shouldn't really go with this type of authentication in your network. Anyone reading the configuration could really understand what is a password and could use it to his benefit or her benefit. So after configuring authentication, you need to configure the authentication key. So I would say IP authentication, IP ospf, of course, authentication dash key is going to be something like whatever. Let's say, for example, e-money 123. Hit enter. So if I just say do show transaction current, it says that this is what is going to happen. So I'm going to copy this so that I can just paste it on router 2. And I'm going to first of all show IP ospf neighbors. For now you can see that router 2 is a neighbor. But as soon as I say commit, it is going to say that router 2 is no longer a neighbor. So you can see that after some time, router 2 is going to be removed from the list of neighbors. That's going to take something like 26 seconds, 25 seconds, and something like that. I'm going to go to router 2, and I'm going to go to configuration mode, and I'm going to just paste this configuration. I'm not committing this because I want to wait for this timer to go down after 9 seconds, and after 9 seconds you should see that router 2 is going to be removed from the list of neighbors, which is right now. Okay, so I'm going to go back to router 2, and I'm going to commit this configuration. As soon as I do this, router 1 is going to create the adjacency with router 2 again. Why? Because now both of these interfaces, both of these devices on the same interface, of course, are supporting authentication. But I'm going to remove this configuration. So I'm going to say do show run interface ETH1. I'm going to say, and the good thing is, you see that the password here has changed. So this is different from other platforms. That's the good news, of course, which you do not really see the actual password here. That's okay. So I'm going to say remove authentication under interface ETH1. And what I'm going to say is IP ospf authentication, but with message digest. Hit enter. So this means that now I'm not using the plain text authentication, I'm using MD5 here. And for that I need to provide a password. So I'm going to say IP ospf message digest key, and then there should be a key number, which could be anything but should match on both sides. So I'm going to say 1, then MD5 is the type, and then what is your password. So I'm going to write this password here. So again, if I say show transaction current, I'm going to use these configuration. So I'm going to say commit on this side to show IP ospf neighbor. That's going to, of course, go down in 30 seconds, 30 something seconds. But before this, I'm going to go to router 2, and I'm going to paste this configuration. I'm going to commit it. Now, as soon as I do that, if I go back to here, you can see that the timer is reset. So if I say do show interface ETH1, now it says that this authentication key should be removed. We don't really need this one. So I'm going to say interface ETH1, no this one. And of course, no authentication key. Okay, commit. If I just go back to the configuration, now you can see that the only lines that I really need is these 2 lines. I should do the same thing on router 2 as a matter of fact. So if I just say no IP ospf authentication key and commit, do show run interface ETH1, so everything is working just fine. Okay, now what I'm going to do is to remove these 2 lines as a matter of fact. Why? Because now I want to configure area type authentication. So what I'm going to do is to say these 2 lines should go, no this, and okay, so no IP ospf. So I'm going to say no IP ospf authentication. Come on. No IP ospf authentication. That's it. And commit. I'm going to say do show run interface ETH1. So I can remove this line as well. So no IP authentication, no IP ospf message digest key, and again commit. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I should say no IP ospf authentication and no message digest key 1. Okay, so committed. and just make sure that ospf neighbors are up and running. So after some time I should see that router 2 is up and running. Okay, so if I want to configure this area wide, all the routers in the area should acknowledge it. So what I'm going to do is to say router ospf1. Under router configuration, I should say area 0 because I am on area 0, and then I have the same configuration here, authentication, and then I can just go with message digest, or I can just hit enter. So which one is preferable? If you want to go with MD5, then you should go with message digest key. So I go with message digest and hit enter. That's it. Every router in the area should approve it. So I'm going to go to router 2, router 3, en configure terminal, router ospf1, and that's it. On router 4, OcNOS, en configure terminal, router ospf1, and hit enter. Router 5, of course. So en configure terminal, router ospf1, that's it. And finally on router 6, en configure terminal, router ospf1, that's it. Okay, I'm going to commit this configuration now on all of these routers. So this is going to remove the authentication, add the authentication, but I have not configured the authentication key. So if it says so IP ospf neighbor, you see that almost all the adjacencies are going to be removed after some time. You see that they are not being refreshed. See? Oh, okay. Now refresh, because we have not configured the authentication key. So I should configure the authentication key on all of the interfaces. So router 1, let's just go with this command that we already had. What was the command? Here we are. Because I use message digest, I should go under all the interfaces and configure this. So I'm going to just use a notepad, and I'm going to say interface EAT1, and I save it here. And the same thing should be configured on EAT2, 3, 4, 5 on router 1. So that is 2, 3, all the interfaces, 6. So I'm going to say commit. This goes on router 1 and 2. Interface EAT1. So okay, I should say exit first. And okay, now I know what the problem is. Okay, now it is fixed. Now I can go to router 1 and router 2. For router 3, we have EAT4, EAT2. So I'm going to just remove some of these. We don't really need so many of them. So we have on router 3 EAT2, EAT4. And I'm going to go to router 3, and for now if I just go to router 3 and say do show IP ospf neighbor, we still have adjacency here, but you can see that the timer is under 30 seconds, and now after some time we don't have anything. So I'm going to paste this, and after some time you should see that we have the adjacencies coming up again. Okay, so loading and full. So for router 2 we have 2 and 5. 2 and 5 here on router 2. For router 4 we have 3 and 5. and router 5, 3 and 5. For router 6 we have 3 and 4. For router 6, 3 and 4. Okay, so what did I say? 6. Okay, so if I just say to show IP ospf neighbor on all of the devices, I need to do it again so that I can see all of them. Okay, now you can see that router 6 has 2 neighbors. Router 5 has 1 neighbor, but it should be 2 and 5. So what did I say here? I said 3 and 5, which is wrong. 2 and 5. So on this router I should do this, and if I just say do show IP ospf neighbor, now I have 2. Router 4 does not have any because I guess I have not configured that. I should say 3 and 5. So if I say do show run interface E3, what did I say? Did I say 2? Okay, so on E3 and 5, I'm going to configure this. Okay, so now I can just say do show IP ospf neighbor, which is okay. Router 3 is okay. Router 2 is okay. Yes. And router 1 is okay. Very nice. So you can see that I have configured area-wide authentication here. The next type of authentication that you can configure is for virtual link. If you just go to router, and I need to go to router 6, for example, which I have a virtual link configured on that. Show run. Here, if you just go to here, you can see that there is the virtual link. I have removed the virtual link. Okay, I'm going to configure it. If you just go with this router ospf 1 and then say area 1 virtual link. Let's say, for example, goes to router ID of 9999, and after that you can say authentication. Again, the authentication could go on this link, or you can go with another link. So I'm going to say message digest, and then after that you can say message digest key. If I have to, I can go to another link. So I would say message digest key is number 1 MD5 Imani 123. You can see that this is going to configure authentication on a virtual link as well. So now if I just say do show IP ospf interface, let's say for example E3, and hit enter, this is going to say that message digest authentication is in effect using key ID number 1, and we are using it. So that is how you configure authentication on ospf v2.